Welcome back, you guys, and today we have our simple landscape here. To get started, we are going to begin with some color mixing. We want to get some nice greens going here for our grasses, so I have some cobalt green, and I'm mixing that with the Sennelier Yellow Deep. And you see that mix is a little bit too bright, so I will pull in a touch of some red to dull that down. Now I want to mix up a few different variations here so that I can have some variety going through the grasses and not have just one straight color. So some of it will have more on the yellow side, some of it will have more on the blue side, and I'm just using that cobalt green as a base. And then the last thing I do is just run a little bit of that raw sepia through there, and that will be my darkest dark. Now let's just practice some of our techniques that we're going to use in this painting. And I wanted to start out just doing some little fence posts, and then I'm using the back of the brush to scrape some of that paint around and get some kind of loose wire looking designs on here. And now for a little tree practice, it's going to mix the French ultramarine with some orange to make a gray and kind of scrape in lightly one of my trees. One of the things, you don't want to get too heavy with your trees, and you got to kind of practice these branch moves to make them kind of bendy and organic looking. So when you gently scrape along the side with the brush hairs, then it'll break up like that and make it look like bark. And we can use that same back of the brush scraping technique when the paint is wet to make some of the smaller branches. The main thing you want with trees is to have things broken up and not too heavy. And then when you have some little dead twig branches all on the side, you can really lightly dry brush scrape those on. So now we want to do a value study. And I have just a couple little references, and I was going to make up my own imaginary landscape, kind of working off of those ideas. So got the hilly background and a stream cutting through with my tree. And I decided to probably put some fence in there and some bushes. So just with the light gray mix, I'm going to do the lightest value, which will be the water in the sky, and the water is reflecting the sky, so that matches. Then the grass will be the next layer of darkness. The further away colors, you can make them a little bit cooler, and then lighter where it becomes into the foreground. So put in my little darks on the water's edge. And those darks happen on the side of the water that's away from you. So my tree is about a medium level here. And then in the foreground, I'm going to have some kind of dark bushes with a little fence. And that fence was a little bit too much, so I'm just going to kind of lift that off a bit with is not helping. There we go. So now I'm confident with my little scene here. I've got a nice flowing composition. So, all right, so I am on slant here and quickly sketch in my little landscape drawing. And just map out where the main branches are. And I'm just making this a little darker so you can see it. So I've got my middle ground hill and the foreground information here. You don't really need to draw too much. We're going to let the paint do the work for us. So I have a little bit of mud in my tray, and I'm going to mix the French ultramarine into that to get a soft sky blue. And I'm keeping some holes for my clouds. And while it's still wet, I got a tiny touch of yellow ochre, which I'm going to put at the bottom of the clouds because they usually have little warm fuzzy bottoms. And then dragged some of that yellow into the horizon. So remember, the water is reflecting the sky, so we got the same color going through here and the stream. And now, so we got to start with our background faraway green. So that will be on the cooler side. So I have my cobalt green, mixing in some French ultramarine and that yellowy green mud that was already there from our previous practice. And it's not fully dry yet, and I want to touch that horizon line into that slightly damp sky area so that little bits of it will bleed up into there and create a distant little row of trees for me. So remember, if your green's looking too bright, you just had to add in a little touch of red, and I'm getting a more yellowy batch made ready so that I can dip from one to the other as I pull down this grassy wash. Okay, so here's the background color going all the way across, and you can see those little bits flaring up into the wet paint. So you want it to be not too wet, otherwise those will completely disappear altogether. Now I'm switching back and forth between some warmer and some cooler. And those variations will make it look like I've got lumps in my hills. Now this little stream is already dried up, so it is safe to carve around it and cut into it without bleeding all over the place. And you can see I'm adjusting the size of the bends in the stream as I'm going to help it look more natural. And I am getting lighter with my grasses as I get closer. Okay, so now we've pulled that forward. So these darks are going in now. And you can see I'm not fully dry yet, so they are melting into there nicely. All right, so my painting's dried and I want to just re-wet that back area a little bit. So I spritz gently the areas I want to get wet again so that I can add another layer and have some soft edges so it will seamlessly blend into there. So gives me some extra hills. So anytime you want to go back in and add something like that, always make sure you dry it first and then just wet the area by spritzing it to get the soft edges. Otherwise, if you dash back into it and it's starting to dry, it's going to blossom on you. And here I'm just kind of scraping in some of the grass reflections. And I am always just adding in little fun textures in the foreground areas. So now we got the tree, not too dark and heavy. And I'm just playing around with this, trying to get different types of broken up branches, using the brush hairs and the back of the brush. And just making sure I got lots of little sticks in different directions. So after a bunch of adding and removing, I'm finally satisfied with that guy. I'm going to move on to the fence posts and these foreground bushes. Again, here I'm just kind of experimenting with these bushes, trying to make different fun textures in here. Sometimes you can just spray the area and let the pigments kind of float up into the bits of spray, and that can make some cool patterns. You can also use some choppy brush strokes and do some scraping out too. And I've got my dry brush scraping to add all the little extra, little tiny branches that are up around the outside edges here. And we need to get some good textures in these foreground grasses too, so just with a pretty dry brush, scraping some paint onto here. And then I'm going to put another big bush over here on this side. So I'm mostly just scraping the paint on and then adding more textures into it by scraping out with the back of my brush. And then just lifting off where it's too much. Now remember with your posts to have them a little bit wonky, not all evenly spaced, and very lightly I'm scraping on some wire. And now I have some kind of watered down white gouache, and I'm going to put these little lumpy oval shapes in the background, and these are going to be my sheep off in the distance. So I don't have the gouache all heavy and thick like acrylic. It's a little bit watered down, and then you put the shadow side. And lastly, just kind of disturb that under part so that they have a shadow. And there you have it. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe.